the JBL Flip 5 versus the JBL Charge 4. So yeah, they look quite different, but some people are saying, well, I know it's a lot smaller, and I know, well, the Charge 4 is like 30 watts and the Flip 5's, 20 watts. But given that this is a more modern speaker, is it any match for the Charge 4? So I'm going to try and answer that question in this video, tell you the differences between these two speakers, not just in the sound, but in the specs. The main differences are, you've got a 4,800 milliamp hour battery in the Flip 5. You've got a 7,800 milliamp hour battery in the Charge 4. So there's a big difference in the batteries. They are both Bluetooth 4.2, even though this Flip 5 has just come out, second half of 2019. No Bluetooth 5, and a lot of other things missing, as you probably already know, from the JBL Flip 5. So like no auxiliary in, which you do get with the JBL Charge 4. You do of course have USB-C. It's probably a big deal now from JBL to actually have that in, 2019. They are almost up with the times, USB-C in both of these speakers. As I already said, 30 watts versus 20 watts, 11.5 watts charger, 15 watt charger on the Flip 5. So it's going to charge a lot quicker than the Charge 4, smaller battery, more powerful charging. It's a lot lighter, about 500 grams versus around 900 grams. Actually, exactly 540 grams versus 965 grams. So a big difference in size. So I'm not sure why people are expecting this to, to be any sort of a match for the JBL Charge 4, but we will see. Both IPX7, which means they can both be submerged in up to 1.5 meters of water for up to 30 minutes. However, should already be telling you that both of these speakers are the TL version. You have GG versions, CS versions, TL versions. With JBL, they are different materials and they do sound different. No matter what JBL tell you, they do sound different. As far as the JBL Charge 4 goes and the JBL Flip 5, as far as I'm concerned, definitely the TL version on the Flip 5 is the better sounding version. You can check out my video where I've got the CS and the GG version, and I haven't heard any other versions of the JBL Charge 4, but people say it's the paper driver in the TL version and it sounds better. So to point out, in this video, it's all about the TL versions, which do seem to be the better sounding versions of these speakers, no matter what JBL say that it doesn't actually relate to anything other than the actual kind of stock and where they're sending it to. So just to say, the TL version doesn't float, the CS version does float, and the GGG version in the Flip 5 floats for a couple of seconds and then it sinks. The Charge 4 does float, and it does float with the drivers to the side, so you can play it. Even with the CS version on the Flip 5, even though it floats, it sounds pretty awful very quickly once the water's got into it. My own unofficial, well unofficial specs for the frequency range on these speakers. I've got the Charge 4, approximately, I'm going to say approximately, this is not an exact science, 56 Hertz to 15 kilohertz. The Flip 5, 63 Hertz to about 14 kilohertz. And that's being generous. That's plus or minus 3 decibels and allowing a little bit of, seepage outside of the, that plus or minus 3 decibels. Because they both are not exactly, but more or less within that range. And in terms of the size of drivers, obviously the Flip 5 is a smaller driver. Just to point out, they are both mono speakers. On the JBL Charge 4, that mono driver, which they call a racetrack sized driver, is 50 millimeters by 90 millimeters, and it's on the left side. On the Flip 5, it's 44 millimeters by 80 millimeters, and it's on the right side. The right side doesn't mean to say that's where it should have been. It just means it's on the opposite side to the Charge 4. Also, I should be pointing out, Party Boost, Connect Plus. So the modes for connecting them in stereo and in party modes are different. So Party Boost can only connect to Party Boost, Connect Plus can only connect to Connect Plus, and if you have Connect to the older version, that can only connect to Connect. Yeah, so they keep changing the versions, and it makes a whole point of having an integrated system where you can connect all your speakers from the same brand as a big party mode. Well, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? So I want this to be about how they sound. How does the Flip 5 get anywhere near being a mini Charge 4? I'm gonna say, first of all, the first thing I would tell you is the Flip 5 plays about the same volume as the Charge 4 if you up the volume by about 5 to 7%. The Charge 4 at 33%, I'm playing the Flip 5 at 40%, and they are basically more or less the same volume, and actually the Flip 5 is a tiny bit louder at that volume. So I've normalized them to make it a fair match. So if you play the Flip 5 almost, one notch up, about 5% louder than the Charge 4, in terms of loudness, they will be matched. But in terms of the actual sound, this is what it is, basically 33%.
And it hurts like this. We climb the greatest heights, jump down and have a fight, and that's all we'll ever like, but that can never change my mind. When it's good, it's amazing. When it's bad, it's uneasy. I wouldn't have it another way. There's no other way. Yeah. When it hurts like this, never like, never like, never like, never like, never like, never like. When it hurts like this, never like, never like, never like, never like, when it hurts like this. We hold each other high, but we fall 1,000 times. But I'd never say goodbye or ever leave this stuff behind. When it's
Charge 4, Flip 5. So the main difference is the Charge 4, the Flip 5. For me, at low volume, this is where the Flip 5 really excels. Bear in mind, I'm playing the Flip 5 about 5% louder than the Charge 4, where the volumes become about the same, and then the differences are in the bass. Yes, the Charge 4 does go lower, 70 Hz, 19.6. But look at the upper bass. This bass peak is quite thin. The Flip 5 has a rounded, more towards the upper bass. So although its peak is at 90 Hz, it's still minus 20 at around the 70 Hz of the Charge 4. So it's very similar to the bass peak of the Charge 4, but it has this bigger upper bass, so it makes it sound quite full-bodied, quite big in the bass. So in terms of the bass, the Flip 5 is a real alternative to the Charge 4 at these low volumes. The difference though is the Charge 4 is more full-bodied, so you can see there's more meat in the sound on the Charge 4 all round. The other difference is there's a bit of a boost around 4,500 Hz on the Flip 5, where there's actually a dip on the Charge 4, which makes the high sound quite different. So the Charge 4 is more full-bodied. The Flip 5 does have a comparable bass because it's quite full, but the Charge 4 will sound fuller in the mids, and the highs will sound different because the highs on the Charge 4, as you can see, the peak in around 12,000 Hz, but with a dip just before that. So the differences are small, but they're there. But at low volumes, the Flip 5 is a match for the Charge 4, I would say. So I've got to say, I think, the Flip 5 does play nicely at low volume. For me, that's probably where it excels. So it is a match. The fact that it's got more, a little bit of an upper bass boost, whereas the Charge 4, it's quite a thin but well-defined lower bass. So it's got, clearly tuned to have plenty of bass punch around like the 60 Hz mark. Whereas the Flip 5 can't quite match that, but it makes up for it by having a bit of a boost in the upper bass. It does go a long way to making them sound a bit more matched, certainly at 33%, certainly at the lower volume. So the question is, what about high volume? In this comparison, I am playing this Flip 5 at 66%. I'm playing the Charge 4 at 60%.
Breathe you in like oxygen. Oh, in an otherwise suffocating world, I'm reaching out for arms, I'm drowning. open-ended love we're making, girl. Exhale the past, inhale a future that lasts. Change my heart, change my mind. For the last time, wanna believe in the life I've led. I don't wanna leave another word unsaid. You know my heart will follow you in tomorrow. In tomorrow. Shared my evidence you once really cared. I'm reaching for a hand.
It's what they talk about, yeah, we were wild and free, and you know everything about me. So wild and free, and you know everything about me. 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 You know everything about me.
Charge 4, Flip 5. So there's more advantage now to the Charge 4 as you go up the volume scale. Charge 4 bass peak 65 Hz 20.1 at 66 Hz you're talking minus 24 for the Flip 5. So you're now about 4 decibels off on the Flip 5 than the Charge 4's bass peak. So that's substantial. And in terms of the upper bass, 22.8 now Flip 5. You're around 21 at the same point on the Charge 4. So that advantage now goes. The Flip 5 does have a better bass lower down the volume scale. As you got the volume scale, it starts to get a bit brighter. So the Charge 4 still has a bit of a meatier sound, but you can see the Flip 5 is now starting to have a bit of a brighter sound. If you look at the highs, around 2,500, you're talking minus 34 on the Charge 4, minus 32 Flip 5. Charge 4 just has a bigger peak at around 8,000 Hz, minus 42, and that's where you actually get a drop on the Flip 5. So the differences change as you got the volume scale. Flip 5 becoming brighter in comparison to the Charge 4, but the Charge 4 becoming more bass heavy in comparison to the Flip 5. So I think the Flip 5 is still doing well, given its size, and given that that's rated 30 watts, Flip 5 rated 20 watts. So it's never going to match, is it, the Charge 4's bass? But there is something else to the sound. I think the Charge 4 is a bit drier sounding. As you go up to these louder volumes, by comparison, Flip 5 is sounding brighter. But the Charge 4 bass, it can't match the Charge 4 bass. Probably, I guess, for a lot of people, you might be picking the Charge 4 simply because you're getting a more obvious bass punch. You could argue it's a bit overblown, but I think probably most people are going to like it. But let's face it, if you're getting the Flip 5, it's going to be for the size. And for the size, it's doing pretty well. If you forget the price, it is about 119 quid, which, given what else you can get out there for that sort of money, it's all about the price and the form factor, I would imagine, for a lot of people. or that you're going to get two of them playing in stereo. And I'm going to do that in my next video, so stay tuned for that, but it's not going to be in this video. So the last test, flat out, what is a real difference when they're absolutely pushed 100% maximum volume?
The girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. The girls with their nails done. Girls with their nails done now. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. Girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done now.
So relative volumes at maximum volume, the difference is actually quite small. In terms of absolute peak, weirdly, the Flip 5 actually has, according to my measurements, and I did repeat them, a bigger peak. But in terms of actual loudness, should be the RMS average 9 is 19.1, Flip 5 19.3, about the same, a hair's breadth to the Charge 4 in terms of across the frequency range, but basically the same overall volumes. In terms of bass, minus 23 at 80, minus 23.8 for the Flip 5. So, you know, just under a decibel in it. So the Charge 4 does have the advantage still in the bass, but the gap is narrow, given the difference in size. One is rated 20 watts, the other is 30 watts. Actual frequency range at these volumes from 300 on the Charge 4, from 400 on the Flip 5, but really, you know, basically they're both bass light, aren't they? So you're not really going to hear that much of a difference. But yeah, the Flip 5 is going to sound brighter. As you can see, it's now got more of the highs. The Charge 4 has got more of the bass. In terms of those mids where the Charge 4 did have an advantage, they're about the same now. If you look at about the minus 33 line, those peaks are around the same. So the difference between them, you know, when you really push them, maximum volume, in terms of actual loudness, about the same. But the Flip 5 is going to sound brighter, the Charge 4 is going to sound a bit bassier. So that's a bit of a surprise, really. There isn't much in it at the absolute maximum volumes. Minus 19.3, RMS average, Flip 5, 19.1. It's basically the same in overall volumes. Obviously, the Flip 5 cannot match the bass of the Charge 4, and that may be enough to differentiate them for a lot of people, that you're going to have still some bass at maximum volume with the Charge 4, but not with the Flip 5. But other people will say, well, it goes nearly as loud, well, basically as loud, just it has a stronger sound elsewhere in the frequency range. And given the difference in size, that's enough for me. This is going to be a lot easier to pack in terms of that bass. The Charge 4, you know, when you're talking about maximum volumes, from about 300 hertz, the Flip 5 from about 400 hertz. So there's an obvious difference, but they both have bass drastically cut at the maximum volume. So I would say the Flip 5, you know, does excel for me at the lower volumes. It can't match, you know, that kind of bass rumble, that obvious bass you get from the Charge 4, but it does have an upper bass warmth on the Flip 5. You know, don't forget, this is all about the TL versions, and my CS version was very, very different. The GG version, which I have, isn't that different, but this is about the TL versions. There's a shimmer to the Flip 5, which I'm not getting with the Charge 4. It's just a drier sound on the Charge 4. There's no magic. It's kind of, you know, most dull and boring, but you can't really pick holes in it. You know, it's reasonably flat across the frequency range, but there's a shimmer. You know, there's a bit more there with the Flip 5, albeit it's a smaller, leaner sound. Some people may find the Charge 4 a little bit too overblown, and the Flip 5 a nice balance. I will say there's a difference in the volume scales on these two speakers. You know, when you get into like into the 90 to 100% volumes, there's not much difference on the Charge 4, where you're still getting, you know, a notable increase in volume as you go up the volume steps, even 90, 95, 100% on the Flip 5. So it's almost as though the Charge 4 tops out before 100%, whereas the Flip 5 is going all the way up to 100%. So that's why at absolute maximum, there's basically no difference in absolute loudness terms between the two speakers. I just want to show you the differences visually between these two speakers, the Flip 5 and the Charge 4, as you got the volume scales. How the differences in the sound all along the frequency range actually change. So the differences between the speakers change depending on the loudness you are playing. So at the low volumes, 33%, actually the Flip 5's at about 40%. So when the volumes are basically matched, 33% Charge 4, 40% Flip 5, these are the differences. You're going to get more upper bass at those low volumes. It's going to sound quite nice. It's going to make it sound maybe even a bit more bass heavy on the Flip 5 than the Charge 4. The Charge 4, as you can see, does go deeper, does extend further in the bass. But Flip 5 has plenty more upper bass. But then around 170-ish hertz, it's dropping away. So the Charge 4 sounds a lot more meaty in the mids. You get a little bit of a hump there around the 4,500 on the Flip 5. So just adding a little bit of brightness, but then it's falling away rapidly. But relatively, again, that's going to make it sound a little more bass heavy. The Charge 4, a flatter frequency response, extending much further. But when you are listening at low volumes and you're going to be, you know, listening out for that bass, the Flip 5 does really well. I think, as I said, this is where it excels at those low volumes. It is a match at low volume for the Charge 4. You just have to play it a little bit louder. As you got the volume scale though, 66%, well actually 60% on the Charge 4, 66% on the Flip 5 to match their volume levels. As you can see, Flip 5 now losing that upper bass advantage, so the Charge 4 does sound noticeably more bass heavy and deeper in the bass. But now those mids are narrowing. It's less of a difference, you know, in the meat of the music. You're getting that high-end hump again, 4,500 on the Flip 5 before it falls away, but then it picks up again at the end. So the differences as you got the volume scale are the Flip 5 relative to the Charge 4 starts to sound brighter, loses out to the Charge 4 more and more in the bass at maximum volume. And this is relative maximum volume. They are both flat out, no adjustments. As you can see, about the same loudness, just that the Charge 4 has more of the bass. However, it falls away rapidly after about 300 to 400 hertz on both speakers. So not much that bass is going to sound significant to you. However, overall, as you can see, now the Flip 5 does have more of the highs. There isn't the difference in the mids. So relatively, again, at maximum volume, the Flip 5 sounds the brighter speaker, but the less bass heavy speaker. So the Charge 4 has the bass, the Flip 5 sounds brighter. And that is how it changes all the way along their volume scale. Flip 5 for me is a good low volume speaker. That's where it excels. The difference between it and the Charge 4, apart from one rated at 20 watts and the Charge 4 at 30 watts, which you wouldn't know by the maximum volume levels, the Charge 4 at normal sort of listening volumes for me, you know, the more 100%, well, the 60% volume is going to be noticeably more bass heavy and meatier and a fuller sound. So yeah, the stereo comparison in another video, and I hope you got something out of this video, and thank you for watching.
UK